My name is Roy Simon. My home has always been in the Consett District, and I'm 89 years old. In 1950, I moved from a small school in September into the sixth form at the Royal Grammar School, Newcastle. My only worry was that I couldn't play football. The compulsory game there was rugby. Once I started to play rugby, I loved it. Derek Wilkinson, who was a friend of mine, persuaded me to join the Consett Club in the spring of 1951. So I've been in the club now for 71 years. And during that time I served the club in various roles. First 15 captain, second 15 captain, third 15 captain, team secretary, chairman and president. I also taught at Consett Grammar School, and in 1964 I was able to introduce rugby into the school. I also formed the first Colts teams at Consett. This was a great pleasure because I always liked working with young people. When I first joined the club in the 50s, it was pretty chaotic. They were very nomadic. They didn't have a field or a clubhouse. The headquarters moved from one pub to the other, from the Burton Hotel to the Imperial Hotel to the Victoria at Black Hill. At first there was no training. We changed in the hut of the Consett YMCA on Sherburn Terrace, which was an old army hut from the First World War, and we changed in the hall with both the visitors and our team and the referee. The playing field at that time was at Dell's Lane. There were two particularly memorable players at that time who were veterans, but were playing for the first or the second team. Martin Huntley was the first of these. He was a miner from Ledgate. He was very tall, had very big shoulders and the largest hands I've ever seen. He could pick up a rugby ball like you and I pick up an apple. He was a strong man. He didn't throw his weight around though, but if anyone started anything, Martin would finish it. He looked after us young players when we went out with the team. During that time, there was one memorable incident when we had to play Northern's first team because they had a cup tie against Percy Park the following Saturday and wanted the practice, so we replaced their second 15. Usually we were well beaten by their second 15 actually, but on that day we held them to less than 20 points, which was very good. And afterwards, in the YMCA hut, I happened to be sitting next to the referee, who was the secretary of Consett Club, but he was a first-class referee, and he was very well respected in the whole of North East England. At that while I was sitting there, George Gibb, who was an ex-international 2 or 3 years before and playing prop for Northern, came over to Alan and said, "Swinny, what were you doing this afternoon?" And Alan said, "I just thought I'd let the pair of you get on me." What had happened, he was noted after an early scrum for thumping his opposite prop. Well, he thumped Martin Huntley, and he lifted his shirt and showed Martin a midriff that was every colour from pink, red, blue and purple. Obviously Martin had been singing his fists in the hidden midriff all afternoon. The other person involved was Jack Ross, who was a school teacher at Ledgate and all-round sportsman. He played cricket for Ledgate, was a great hero with his fast bowling and big hitting. The children at the school all loved him and the parents respected him. On a rugby field, he was a demon at times because he had a little bit of a temper in him. But he was a superb player who played second row for the county before the war. Jack again was a bit of an enforcer for the team on the field and also again looked after the young people and gave us lots of advice. At that time, there was no training in the club, not having a field or a clubhouse. So we were a bit chaotic. We never knew who was going to be playing with you exactly the following Saturday. Cards were sent out informing we were on the first team or the second team, and we travelled by bus to away games. As a reason for this, the teams were not very well organised and we often got beaten. This went on until we eventually, in the mid-50s, got the lease of the new pitch which the council created at Bellevue, which is still our pitch today. A hut was followed later. That was brought with donations from players and committee members. Once we got that, we were able to start training properly, although it wasn't official then, it didn't have to train. But some of the younger ones on the side were sick of getting beaten and we started to train, and things improved. I went into the army from a national service in 1956, and for those 2 years I only played at Consett when I was home on leave. When I came out in 58, it was noticeable that new players had been recruited who were very keen, and there was an enthusiasm to make progress. A year after that, I became captain in 59, which was a good time to start because there was a momentum in the club to move forward. Also, Consett Iron Company was thriving at the time, and new people were coming in to appointments in different departments, and they also started a graduate training scheme which brought university players in to train with the company. As a result of that, we had an influx of trained rugby players coming to the club because no school at that time played in the area. This made us a much stronger team, and we went forward to have considerable success in the 1960s. During that time, we had our best runs in the County Cup. In 1962-63, we played Billingham, who were an ICI supporter team and very strong on Teesside, in the first round, and drew Struwell away. The following Saturday, we beat them 8-3 at Consett. We went on after that to play a match against Hartlepool on the 29th of December. Unfortunately, that was the next round and was cancelled because of all the snow. It was the start of a big freeze, and that match never got played for another 12 weeks. It was played on the 9th of March at Hartlepool on the coast. Consett then was still covered in snow and ice. Following week we couldn't replay them because the Consett pitch was still frozen. The next week we played them and we won 3-0, but the pitch was an absolute quagmire from all the melting snow. As a result of that, we were in the semi-final of the Durham County Cup for the first time. We're not in our best form because the snow had disrupted us training, we'd lost our momentum a little bit, and Durham City with a cracked side. The England standoff, Mike Weston was their star player, and he had the longest kick in the country. The hooker Stan Hodgson supplied them with a ready ball. He was the English hooker as well, and they had some other star players playing for the county in their team. They hammered us 61-3. Unfortunately, one of our best players, John Kelman, was fettled by one of their props in the first half and was taken to hospital. Other two players had accidents, so we finished up with a depleted team because there were no replacements, and we were carrying 2 passengers and were a man short. That was a lesson which we learned from. The next season in the County Cup, we played Hartlepool all boys away again. We went down there and we beat them 9-6. That was a running encouraging result because at that time they had quite a strong team. In the next round, which was the quarter-final, we had to play Durham City again, but this time at home, and we'd had a good run in the fixtures we'd had previously to that. In the first half, we really got stuck into them, and we went ahead in that half 8-0. They've got 2 penalties, which made it 8-6. We still pressed hard and defended hard, but they were getting a lot of the ball from Hodgson, and Weston was kept kicking us back into our own 25. This obviously tired us out, and in the last 10 minutes, where we were still leading 8-6, they suddenly scored 2 tries. Mickey Weston engineered them both. The first with a very clever move where he did a long reverse pass to Len Roll coming in at speed, and he cut 3 through us to score. That followed again. We went up to their end, he booted us back, and this happened 2 or 3 times because we were trying to win then because they were leading 11-6. He did the same thing again, really, kicked us back down 25. One of our players knocked on. They had a scrum. Hodgson got the ball. Mike Weston did a clever scissors, and they scored again. And at the end, just before the end, they added another penalty to beat us by 19 points to 8. But the team had really advanced from the defeat of 61-3 the previous season. And Mike Weston was very gracious after the game when we were having our food and drink, when he spoke in a little speech, and he said, well, the next time you play us, you should beat us, the progress you made in the last year. As a result of this success, we had improve fixture lists, because it weren't leagues in those days and you arranged your own fixtures. And we got fixtures with the fashionable clubs. In that time, we played some excellent clubs who were much stronger than we were. I remember in November '63 we played Bloden away, and Bloden at that time was improving no end, and it just reached the final of the County Cup for the first time since the pre-war days. They always had strong forwards, but they'd also got a lot of keen backs playing for them. We went down there. At the beginning we started very well, and we were leading 5-0. Then disaster struck after 7 minutes when our hooker was fettled by a notorious prop of theirs and taken off. Worse was to follow a few minutes later when our star wing forward John Marks, who was a very keen tackler, a Welsh lad, and was a great player for us, and he injured his shoulder. And I asked him to go off, but he wouldn't. He said, "I'll stop on the wing, Roy, and get in the way." And he did that because he had very quick feet. As the game went on, just on half-time, Cam Farrell, the fast winger from them, broke away and scored a try in the corner. Eventually, we held out until the last 10 minutes, although we were much depleted side against a very strong pack. But unfortunately, Cam Farrell himself then engineered a very clever move where he created space and shot down the wing from his 25 to ours and scored again. Brian defeated in the last minute, but just 6-5. It's quite a memorable day for us as well. Following that, we had fixtures with West Hartlepool and had a good affinity with them, because every time we went to Hartlepool in those days, whichever team we were playing, after we'd had the game and refreshments and spoken to the team we were playing in the bar, we used to go to the West Clubhouse, because they didn't have a clubhouse in a field of their own. They had this solitary house sticking up on the edge of the industrial area, and that was their clubhouse. Opposite was a car park, and nearby was the Greyhound Stadium in West Hartlepool, and that's where they played their fixtures. We went there, we enjoyed their company, we had great fun, and after we left there we went to the town hall dance before we came home. So that was a regular thing. But with the fixtures we had with them, they were a very strong team again at the time, who were now rivaling the premier team in Hartlepool in those days, which was Hartlepool Rovers. They had county players playing for them, and they had 2 players who eventually played for England. We had a series of games away with them in particular where we did very well. In '59, we just lost 14-17. In '60, we just lost 5-3. In the following year, '61, which was the most memorable game I remember for Consett, we defeated them by 11 points to 5 at Hartlepool. That was quite a feat. It was a day where we planned what our strategies were, and everybody stuck to the plan, and we managed to beat them. So it was a real success for us. As a result of that, we got even more fixtures with good clubs. And in those days, we used to travel at Easter to play in Cockermouth in Cumberland. And at that time, they were, again, a very strong team in Cumberland. And in 1965, we went over there on Good Friday to play them, and we had a depleted team. We had a wing forward from the second team playing full-back, who was a great defender, but he couldn't kick. And we knew whenever John caught the ball, he would just run with it till he was stopped. At least we knew what was going to happen. But we had an element of rugby league in them, you see, because in Cumberland there's a lot of rugby league, both professional and minor rugby league. They play with rugby league tactics, some of them not very clear. The referees also over there were different in their interpretation of the laws to the referees in the northeast. We also had 2 young half-backs playing for us that had been playing for Durham School, Peter Cavey at stand-off and Tony Barr at scrum half. And they would start dishing out the dirty stuff. They stamped on the back of my hand when the bottom were up, for example, and they said about our young half-backs. That got our anger up, and we controlled that and put it into our game. There was still no score when we were well into the second half, and there's a very strange incident happened. One of our defenders cleared from the left-hand side of our 25, and the ball went right down towards their 25 on the right wing. Our right winger, David Barda, was flashing after it like lightning, and our full-back was careening back at similar speed to get to the ball first. A dog ran onto the pitch and stuffed the ball and then ran off again. The pair of them arrived at the ball at the same time. They hadn't slowed down. He dived on the ball to stop it. David managed to get his foot to it, and it went through onto the edge of the goal line. And David followed up, tapped it over, and found the ball. And we beat them 5-0, and they were unbeaten through all that season until that match. It was an unexpected victory for us. Following that, the club was really making progress. At the time, the two star players we had were the two wing forwards. John Maggs, who came from Tredegar in Wales. He was very skillful. He had a tackle that cut people in half, rather like the All Blacks do. And he was very skillful as well. The other one, John Kelman, came from Tomontoul, the highest village in Scotland. He came on a company graduate scheme from Aberdeen University. He was also an exceptional wing forward, and he didn't tackle as hard as John, but nobody ever got past him. He was a great forager for the ball, and once he had the ball, he was very elusive. In fact, it was very difficult for us to support him because you never knew which way John was going to go. They stayed with the club, although they're the best two wing forwards in the county, but the county never picked them because Consett weren't a fashionable club. John was picked for a county trial at North Durham early in the season, and several of us went down to watch the match. He was playing for the Possibles against the Probables, who were the previous year's County 15. The Possible beat the Probable team comfortably, and John scored, I think, 3 tries, if I remember rightly, in that game, still not picked by the county. Any halfbacks of the clubs we played against always said that the toughest afternoons they had were when they played against Maggs and Kelman for Consett. Despite that, we heard that the county selectors had said he didn't pass the ball, which was a ridiculous comment. 1 try scored, he virtually ran through the whole of their side. My happiest memories with the club really came from the social side, because when you join the rugby club, there's always a social circle you're into. At first, of course, in the first few years, it was always the men's song and beer, and there wasn't much of ladies apart from occasion socials and dances. But it was a very napped thing, and when people moved away, they went to join a club, and immediately they had a social circle to go into. The Tups were formed. This was a veterans team, and that created another social circle with a great social life where the wives and partners took part in the social activities to raise money and the various dinners which they held. There was a lot of comic events went on to entertain at the dinners, and when you went, whether it was the male or female who was there, you knew at some stage of one of these events you would be teased and made fun of, but everyone took it in great fun. In those days we used to play Tynedale on New Year's Day. It was a bit ridiculous after all the New Year's celebrations. In 1960, when we went over there, we played in the longest match Consett ever played. We're doing well, and the Heroes had a very strong team with a lot of farmers, and in their fixtures they played against some of the Scottish border teams. They usually beat us, but we often gave them a close game. In that game, unfortunately, they scored what was described in their paper as an easy try early in the game. In actual fact, their scrum half, Kettle Thompson, was miles offside when the ball went loose. He just picked it over and dropped over the line with it. The referee seemed not to see that. Battled on in the second half. It went on and on. We got tireder and tireder. And when there was noises from the little small stand that they had, people shouting at the referee, he kept looking at his watch and carried on. Eventually, we struggled off exceptionally tired, only to find that we'd played an extra 20 minutes in the second half. The spectators thought it was very amusing because it looked as though we were playing by memory and in slow motion. We didn't realise that. We thought we were still trying as hard as we could go. Fancy playing an hour for the second half in rugby. Still, after the match, nobody suffered anything, and after food and a couple of pints in the tiny clubhouse, everything was all right. The other funny memory throwing when I got concussion. I'd been knocked on the head, came off the field, dose of smelling salts under your nose, and you went back on again in those days. Eventually, when I got in the baths after the match, I suddenly sort of came to, but I couldn't remember anything about the game. And the report in the local paper was headed, "World scores twice in the game that never was." And everyone said to me, "Well, we'll have to kick in the head each week before so we can get some more tries, you know." So that was, quite a daft situation, really. My biggest thrill these days is seeing how the club has changed from what it was 71 years ago. Now it's thriving with a lovely clubhouse, their own field, and an abundance of young players, mini rugby booming with over 100 kids coming at the weekend and their parents. The courts are well supported, the club is doing well, the standard of play is very good, and when you go there, there's a great welcome. I just hope it will continue in the same vein. It's make further progress, but it's doing very well as it is. I'm very pleased to see this. May it go on for a long time.
My name is Frank Richardson. I joined the club in 1958. I've been a member of the club for 64 years. I started playing rugby at the suggestion of Ernest Wilkinson, or as he was known as Ernie Wilkinson. His brother Derek Wilkinson had played prior to me joining the club. And what he suggested was for me to watch a game. So I duly went and watched a game. And what I recall from that game was two things. One, it was considerably more aggressive than table tennis, which is what I'd played before, the only sport I'd played. And secondly, I stood next to a retired rugby player who is still around today, so I cannot mention names. And during the match, there was what I would remember now probably be a maul or a ruck. There was no sight of the ball, but there was 10 people just fighting each other. And I heard this chap on my right-hand side say, "Stand on his face." And that had never heard anything like that in table tennis. So the next week, I had offered to have a game. So I duly turned up, and my training or coaching was limited to someone telling me to stick my head between some legs, and that was it. And after 80 minutes of being battered and bruised, I sort of retired, but I thought much about it, and I eventually decided, yes, I'd give it a go. In those days, we had to buy our own kit, shirts, shorts, socks, and wash them for the following week. And at the same time, we had to pay 2 and 6. This was called team fees. In today's money, that's 12.5p. After the next week, in fact, my good friend Brian Clark, he joined the club. We both joined as second row forwards, believe it or not, and both of us were only 5 feet 9.5. Later on, I developed an interest in playing wing forward, and most of my time at wing forward was spent, according to folklore, in an offside position. In fact, I think I have the unofficial club record of giving away the most penalties. One thing I learned quickly was that rugby wasn't just about playing the game. The social life was indeed quite different from what I'm used to. A lot of my friends at the time, personal friends, joined the club. John Cunningham, John Dunn, Alan Peard, Arthur Pickering. At the time of my joining the club was being run by very competent people. Leslie Anglis was the president. He was retired chemistry master. Tom Bruce was chairman. I became very friendly with Tom for many, many years. Vernon Gates, he was secretary. Jack Foster was treasurer, and John Davison was the fixture secretary. These are the people who, I think none of them were still playing rugby. The facilities didn't really exist. We had to change and wash at the local YMCA. We drank at the Imperial or the Victoria Black Hill, and also the Beehive. The team was picked During the early 60s, the teams were picked on a Monday evening at the Imperial, and you got a card posted to you, believe it or not. And if they weren't posted to you, then they were delivered by John Davison on a scooter. Others in the club at the time, and this is 58 to 1960, were Roy Timon, Gus Bullerwell, Paul Hutchison, Terry Burns, Jack Tucker, and Jim Tucker. The first hut we acquired was, I think, was a First World War hut, and I remember that it didn't have many facilities, but we could change there. Brian Clark and Laurie MacDonald, they were the people who were instrumental in converting the areas to sort of changing rooms. And then we acquired a second hut much later on, probably about 63, 64, and that was an old, that was a second-hand prefabricated classroom, and that was much better for facilities. At that time, there was an influx of players from the Consett Line Company. A lot of the Consett Line Company itself had recruited a lot of graduates and other people as well, but from outside the area. And the names I have to mention there are John Kelman, Derek Broadley, Derek Robson, Wally Knox, Alan Humble, Ben O'Connor. The local lads playing for the Consett Line Company, working for Consett Line Company, but playing for Consett were Terry Burns and Keith Towns. Much later, in the middle 60s, we also had an influx of players from the CIC, but these were local lads. Charlie Smith, Willie Allison, Bob Bell, Ernie Hobbs, Jeff Carlisle. When John Kelvin joined the club, he was from Scotland, he joined the club, and at that time Roy Timon and John Maggs, they were the back row forwards. Johnny Kelvin joined them, and in my opinion, in terms of the three of them, they were probably the best back row forwards we ever had in the club's history. That's my opinion. Once we had the facilities to serve teas after the match, we were requested to recruit some tea ladies, which we acquired from the local dance halls, etc., and they served as well. The social life, as I said before, was very good at the rugby club, and one particular social event, which was a key event in the annual programme, was the annual dinner dance, or annual dance, between the Friday night between Christmas and New Year. And the first one I attended was in the Civic Hall in Middle Street. It still exists, and I was quite amazed that halfway through the evening a rugby ball suddenly appeared, and there was absolute mayhem. There were foremen, scrums and everything. Once Brian Clark and I got involved in the social side, we added some decorum and calmness and discipline to the events. In the middle 60s, the club was still struggling to even break even, and we had to make money from all kinds of areas: barbecues, sports days, and again, I mentioned them 2 or 3 times, Brian Clark and I had the idea to run some discos, and after a long time, we managed the committee to give us a huge total of £40 to buy equipment, and we ran the discos, and they were very successful and made a lot of money. Interestingly, quite a few of the young people who attended these discos eventually played rugby for Consett. In particular, I remember Todd Marshall and Steve Marshall, his brother. I can remember them at the junior discos, and they went on to become, sound players for Consett. In my opinion, my most memorable player in terms of skill, determination, tackling, was a name I mentioned before, John Kelman. He was a wing forward. He was a great leader, great tackler. And interestingly, he eventually had to leave the club to work in Sheffield, and but he did eventually play for Brazil. And the club itself don't have many international caps, but he's one of them. The other players at the time, I'm talking middle 60s, who were all good players, good leaders, and most of them could read the game, which I never could. Johnny Marks, Roy Timon, Keith Horn, Robin Gates, Jim Tucker, and Derek Broadley. And these lads were all, in my opinion, were all county class, but they could never get a game for the county because they played for Consett. And the county players only came from Northern, Percy Park, Durham City, and played clubs like that. Interestingly, last week, and they wouldn't even give us a game in those days. Interestingly, last week we beat Percy Park, and the week before we beat Durham City. Other lads who I can remember in the club was John Lilly, Paul Hetherington, Stuart Hetherington, Ian Foster, Paul Middlemist. I could go on, but it would take too much time. Someone eventually had the good idea of having an annual match between Consett Company and the club, because there was a lot of players from the company. And this was an annual event for about, my memory, about 8 or 9 years. Two notable things. One, the club never lost a match, and I apparently, according to what I was told, I scored the first try in the first ever match. The most memorable match I remember was certainly when both teams played West Hartlepool, and it was 1961. The club had never beaten West Hartlepool before, and the first team beat them 11-5, and the second team, which I was playing for, we beat them 6-0. And I also remember our captain bought me and my friends, I think he bought everyone whiskies after the match. But that was quite a notable event because we'd never beaten them before. Going to the characters, I think every club, whether it's table tennis, football, they always have characters. And our club, certainly in the 60s I refer to, we had characters, in particular Charlie Smith, Ian Foster, George McGlenn. George McGlenn was an ex-miner, and he was a good pack leader, and he had a wonderful wit. I would class him as a wonderful character. And I mentioned another one, Keith Towers. He was an on-field character, because this lad just loved to be injured. And I think his ambition in life, in terms of rugby, was to get carried off on a stretcher. And this actually happened at Blade, and I was playing that particular game. But that guy just loved to get injured and attention. The pitches were unusual in those days. Consett pitch, which I played on, first team pitch, it had a public footpath going right across the middle of the pitch, and you'd be amazed how many times I witnessed women with push chairs, men with dogs, just walking across the pitch in the middle of a game. Another interesting pitch was at Houghton, which we played sort of twice a year, and their field was quite a slope, but the local farmer used to use the pitch to graze his cows during the week, and then take the cows off the field for a Saturday. So not only had you be adept at sidestepping the opposition, you also had to be adept to sidestep the cowplats. Memories off the field and humorous incidents, the two I recall best was a one at the Rex Hotel, where both teams had been playing North Shields, and we ended up in the Rex Hotel and the beer was flowing, and one of our guys, George Austin, scrum half, he just suddenly got onto the stage, started smoking a cigarette, and within seconds he had the smoke coming out of his ears. I never ever forget that. The other one, which was, I think it was a New Year's Eve party, and there was a lad called Mickey Breen who's still with us today. I mean, I was talking about him just last Saturday. And some people, the Alan McConnell list crowd, persuaded Mickey Breen to climb into his sack at 8 o'clock and demonstrate his psychology skills. And he was in the sack until 12 o'clock because he didn't realise just how tight the thing. In terms of doing things for the club in the 60s, what I can say is that this crowd of guys which I'm currently with, we have two former chairmen, former first team captain, former second team captain, two social secretaries, one president. So they've all served the club in other respects rather than just playing rugby. Right, now finally I'm going to refer to the formation of the Tups, which was a social team which a few of us, by the end of the 60s, we'd more or less finished playing, but certainly serious rugby. So we formed a social team, and that existed for about 9 or 10 years in the 70s. But the reason I mention it is that the people I'd played with in the 60s and in the Tups, that's how they're all good friends even today. And what I mind sort of, not advice, my comment to the youth of today's rugby is that yes, enjoy your rugby, concentrate your rugby, but what you will probably not realise, you are developing friendships which will last years and years. There are 9 of us, 9 of us currently. We'll watch all the matches. We meet up about every 6 weeks, have a lunch. And these guys are all people I played with in the 60s and early 70s. And it's just wonderful, the friendships you develop in playing rugby, which I think exists in some other sports.
I'm Keith Thorne. I was born near Lanchester and I've lived in this area ever since. I started playing rugby at the grammar school under the tutelage of Roy Tyerman. He was team secretary at the rugby club, and I joined the rugby club to play for the Colts in 1967. In 1968, I made my debut for the first team away to Billingham, and I played continuously till the end of the 1983 season, and then thereafter I played the occasional game. I was club captain for a number of years in the 1970s, and my final season I played as second team captain. I started to play for the Colts in 1967. Brian Brown, who was a first team player, had broken his leg, and he looked after us, even though we had a broken leg, to go and make sure that nobody did anything they shouldn't when we were away playing. I'm talking now about players that I remember. Stephen Beck and Robin Gates were the first 2 captains I played under at the first team. They were both very good players. We had a number of people that worked at British Steel Consett: Bob Bell, Willie Allenson, Charlie Smith, Jimmy Arden, Derek Scott, all of whom played in the forwards and were very steady players. The backs at that time tended to be people from the grammar school, and as such were a fairly young team, so we struggled on occasion, but overall we managed okay. In my early days, Stephen Beck was first team captain, Mel Spratt was second team captain, and Ted Robinson was third team captain. And they, together with Roy Tyerman as team secretary, ensured that we had 15 players to go to the various games. I took over as captain in the early 70s, and at the time the club was going through various changes. For example, in the early days you had to buy your own shirt, but we managed to get together enough money to purchase a set of shirts, which was the first time we'd done that. And also the club elected a club coach. The first one was John Barrow, and he did it for a couple of years. And then Ian Stonehouse took over. He concentrated on the junior end, and the nature of the Colts expanded from basically what was Consett Grammar School in my day. As other schools in the area took on playing rugby, we managed to expand the network of schools that we used, and this supplied us with a steady supply of good quality young players, and that helped to develop as we went along. I captained the first team up until the very early 80s, and I think we were a better team at the end than we were in the early days, in that we had a nucleus of good players that knew what they were doing, and we tried to play to a system that resulted in us maximising our capabilities. Notable players at the time would be John O'Connor as scrum half. The likes Barry Rowland and Les Barron played in the front row. Paul Middlemas played in the back row and was my vice captain. And we managed to generally play the way we wanted to, which was to try and not be too expansive, but to look to maximise the opportunities that we had. In terms of games that I remember, there are a few. I remember playing just after New Year against Bladen, which was the first time that I played under lights, which was a different experience. We got beaten, but not disgraced. We then played Bladen in the County Cup a year or two later, down at Swansfield. We lost Robin Gates to injury, and in those days we weren't allowed replacements. We lost by 2 points, but sadly I had the opportunity to kick a penalty near the end from near the halfway line. I got the distance, but not the accuracy. Again, about the same time, we played Brighton. They had 2 or 3 county players at the time, and that was memorable because we managed to hang on to win. Derek Scott went toe-to-toe with George Gainford, the number 8 for Brighton, who was a county player. We tackled everything, but managed to hold on and win. Probably the best game that I remember would be against Mountain Park. Mountain Park were a club on the way up, and we managed to get a fixture with them as a replacement fixture. We played at Consett, but we had 2 or 3 key players missing, so I was rather apprehensive before the game. Barry Cook managed to pick up the ball in our 22, ran the length of the field to score, and we got to the last quarter of the game leading by less than 1 score. Their winger broke away at one stage, and we just managed to tackle them in touch, but my abiding memory of that was that Paul Middlemist had a pot on his leg, and he was travelling as fast as I'd ever seen him and was in danger of tackling the player. Turning now to the daftest thing that ever happened to me, we used to play Cockermouth every September, either home or away. And when we went away, we used to stop at the Golden Fleece at Brampton on the way back and stay there until closing time before coming home. This particular day, I went to pick up the ball as Mickey Green decided to kick it. Unfortunately, he missed the ball, hit my hand, with the result that I broke a bone at the bottom of my thumb. It was uncomfortable. I had difficulty getting changed, and when we got to the Golden Fleece, they decided to play this drinking game whereby you have to do what the Master of Ceremonies says. Well, usually it was required me to drink with my right hand, and I couldn't, so I had to keep paying forfeits. By the end of the evening, I was nicely numb, got home, next morning woke up to be told by my wife that we were going to move furniture, and if you've ever tried to move an upright piano with a broken hand, I would suggest you try something quite different. I enjoyed my time playing rugby at Consett. It was a privilege to be first team captain, and indeed I enjoyed my time as second team captain. But perhaps the thing I remember most is the various functions, from formal dinners to Friday nights in the clubhouse, where there was a variety of people, and it was our social life basically for a number of years.
Hi, my name's Barry Cook. I'm now 66 years of age, and I've lived in Consett all my life. I was born and bred here. My first touch of a rugby ball, my first experience of rugby, was in the 1960s. My next door neighbour at the time, who was obviously be at school, called Peter Hudson, I later found out he was a top class rugby player for the Consett club, which I didn't know at the time, and we used to play rugby in the street with him. I actually didn't really start playing rugby until I went to the grammar school in the late 1960s. We didn't play curricular rugby in the 1960s at school, but we did play extracurricular. So we have to stop after school and and people like Roy Tyman, who you've just been talking to, would look after the team. We would have games and we would have training. When I was 14, I was invited to come and play for the Colts. That's the under 18 team, and from then on I played right through to the Colts until I was a 16-year-old. And when I was 16-year-old, I made my first team debut. My debut was at Hortonley Spring, and I played in the centres. I kept going back between the first team and the Colts. We also had a very, very successful Colts team. I was captain of that team, and we managed to win the County Cup. I forget what year it was, but it was certainly early or late, towards the late 70s. In 75, I left school and I went to college and I trained to be a PE teacher. I was really, really lucky once I got finished my training and I got a job back at my old school, because basically I knew a lot of the teachers from there, and I joined a very, very experienced PE department. When I was at college, I used to come home every weekend to play rugby for the first team, and also I used to bring my washing home for my mother as well. Once I was at school, I took over the rugby, teaching the rugby, because we were quite a go-ahead PE department, and I took over the rugby both at curricular level and extracurricular level, and I did that until I retired. So I stopped at that school all my working life, and I've been retired now about 10 years. Memorable players. My memorable players when I was at Colt would have been the Robinson brothers, Stephen and Martin. They came to us from a private school down in South, and obviously had a lot more of a rugby education than we had, because they were exceptional players. And there was one homegrown player, Davy Dunn, who I thought was a tremendous player, and he played with me through at senior level as well as Colts. As far as senior top class players is concerned, I've had quite a few. Keith Horn again, who you've just been talking to. Keith Horn was the captain of my first team for many, many years. Exceptional player, big, strong lad. But the key important players I ever played with were when we first brought New Zealanders in to play over in this country in the 1990s. Was the two people concerned were Mark Seymour and Kurt McQuilkin. They used to go into schools, used to help me at my school, and we did curricular rugby and extracurricular rugby, but they also went representing the club into all the primary schools in the Downside area, where we would have tournaments at the end of the season, and overall it was a really successful campaign. Those two players, I've never played with people like that. They were fast, they were strong, they were so skillful. We just couldn't keep up. They were that good at players. Kurt McQuilkin eventually went on to play for Ireland, even though he was a Kiwi, and now he's back in New Zealand and he coaches King Country in New Zealand. The funniest moment I've ever come across in my rugby career is when we were playing at Northern at McCracken Park. It was Northern 1 was at the time, wasn't the first team, they were too good for us. But one of our players, Desi Young, was injured, quite badly injured, and he was actually carried off. And Phil Murphy that particular time, you have to believe that it was the timing that was important. As he was getting carried off the pitch, Phil Murphy asked him, could he have his boots if he didn't want them anymore? I have two sons. Jonathan, he doesn't play anymore, but he lives in London, and he referees on the national panel, so he's refereeing people just down from the Premiership. He really enjoys the refereeing rather than playing. And my youngest son, Nicholas, he's in his second period as first team captain, but they both came through the mini and the junior sections, and that's what gave them the love of the game, just like I have, and other people who you've been talking to before have exactly the same. I also have now a young grandson who's just short of 18 months. I'm hoping he'll play so he gets as much out of rugby as me, my sons and my family have. It's a great game, it's a great club, it's a great community, and hopefully we'll move into the next 100 years, and Leo, the grandson, will be part of that.
My name is John O'Connor. I've been involved with Consett Rugby Club for well over 50 years, and I'm here today to tell you about the changes in Consett Rugby Club in the 1990s. The decade started in 1990, the club with dilapidated facilities, a turnover of less than £10,000, no development plan, in fact no plans of any description. This is in the context of Consett Steelworks being closed in 1980 and the repercussions, both financial and cultural, echoing through that decade. By the end of the decade, by 1999, the turnover of Consett Rugby Club was over £500,000. We'd leave it in almost £1 million of capital investment, and in 1999 we became the English Sports Club of the Year at the Café Royal with a presentation by Sir Trevor Bruggen. So I'm going to try and run through some of the milestones of the 1990s that got us from basically dilapidation to being regarded as one of the leading sports clubs in England. And I can just say it's the old Eric Morecambe expression, we were playing all the right notes but not necessarily in the right order. In 1990, myself and Barry Cook, who you've heard from today, decided to try and put together a development plan. There was very little rugby being played in schools. In fact, all of the parameters of what made a good rugby club told us that we weren't doing very well. So we put across a development plan, and then we took a chance. We were young guys at that particular stage, around about 30, young kids, business, but we took a chance. And the first leap of faith we took was in 1991 when we hosted the Rugby World Cup, and we found two international rugby players, Kurt McQuilgan and Mark Seymour. Could we come and play for Consett? We thought at first it was a joke, but when they turned up they were the real McCoy, and they became our first rugby development officers. And they took the game into the schools of Consett District, and the fact that you had two basically All Blacks in the schools at the same time the World Cup was on created a huge stir of interest. So we knew if we could get the right product out into the schools, we had the makings of a school development plan. So that went through 91, 92, and then we realised that from a capital perspective, our dilapidated green hut wasn't really the base to do any serious development. So where we shooting our video today, we're in the Demi, as it's known, but it was in fact the Consett District Irish Democratic Club, which had been closed for 2 years. In 1994, we took a leap of faith and acquired this place as our base in Consett. Here we are 28 years later, it's worked. Suddenly, it gave us the base, the income, the revenue to fulfill some of our development plans. And then outside forces took shall we say, a detour. In 1995, the World Rugby Union declared rugby to become an open sport, i.e. to become professional. At the same time, in England, we launched the National Lottery. So, Consett Rugby Club was application number 4 of the National Lottery. You got a reference? Ours was 95004. We put a bid in for about £600,000. We got other funds, and suddenly we're on our way. We had a business that produced an income. We had capital expenditure from grants, and here we were, little Consett Rugby Club, suddenly with more toys. We didn't really know what to do with them, but we had a fair idea, we had a vision of what we wanted the place to look like at the end. So throughout the late 90s, we became a series of firsts. We were the first rugby club in England to have a male and female development officers. We devised an international exchange where we had 12 international rugby players from New Zealand, South Africa, Australia came across. We sent boys, including me, I wasn't a boy, but we sent people to New Zealand and to South Africa, and suddenly we were on the map. And as a result of, I suppose, luck because of the National Lottery and rugby going professional, Consett Rugby Club in the 90s was transformed. And that was down to a bit of luck, a bit of chancing if you're armed sort of thing, but mainly down to the hard work of a small group of people who went from zero to hero, and it was a classic case of rags to riches. And the rugby club where it is today in 2022, looking forward to its centenary, basically all the infrastructure, the bedrock of where we are today was laid in the 1990s. And that is the lesson for folks who are looking at this maybe in years to come, that you require always a little bit of luck, but you always require hard work and a plan that will see you through. And we were very fortunate that the plan that we put together encompassed all the development things that we're talking about: schools, youth, female, etc. And we went from, in 1990, struggling to get 2 teams out. By the end of the decade, we had 4 senior teams and 10 junior teams. Suddenly, from a small club, we became a big club, and that has really been the story of the 1990s. And as I said, it was culminated when myself and Barry and our coach at the time, Eddie Bell, ex-England international, went to the Cafe Royal, and Sir Trevor Brooklyn gave us a plaque as the Sports Club of the Year and a cheque for £3,000, and I was asked to respond. And the question I was responding to was, how did you get to be, the Sport England Club of the Year? And I kind of repeated what I've said today, that it was a combination of good luck, hard work, and change of circumstance. And really, that's the lesson that I want to say. I think I must have played over 600 games for Consett, and I've played with some interesting characters, shall we say. And the one that I would use was, and it reflects, it is humorous, I suppose. I played with a player called Charlie Malpas, who was renowned more as a drinker than a rugby player, but sometimes you can compare the players. And we played a game up in Cumbria against Cockermouth, and they had a very good international player playing for them at the time. And he collected the ball and he kicked the ball into touch. The line-out was set, and about 20 seconds later, Charlie tackled this fella, the latest of the all-late tackles. And I was captain that time, and the referee got me and he said, "Your player has tackled that person miles after the ball has gone. What have you got to say?" So I looked at Charlie and I said, "Charlie, what have you got to say?" And Charlie said, "I got there as soon as I could," which was the perfect example of that Charlie had run all this way to tackle the fella, and the fact that he didn't have the ball was incidental. He wasn't going to run all that way for nothing, so he tackled him off the ball, and that became Charlie's catchphrase, "I got there as soon as I could." And he is still one of the most amusing of characters, because his improvement in rugby is related to how many pints of beer he has. So if you see him at the start, he was terrible at rugby, but by the end of the night, he was the best rugby player you've ever seen. So he would be one of the more amusing interludes, the ones that I can actually share. I'd like to talk about the future of the club. As I said, as we film this in 2022, 2 of the biggest clubs in England, Wasps and Worcester Warriors, have gone bankrupt. So for the future of the rugby club, it's great to be enthusiastic and opportunistic, but always to remember that it all has to be paid for, and be always, like Mr. McCorber, spend within your means. And we have some ambitious plans to enlarge the clubhouse and to do other things with it. But we always, in the 90s, as I said this time, we tended to use grant funding to make sure, so we knew we would never go into debt to achieve our objectives. And clearly some clubs have decided to go into debt to achieve their objectives and haven't been able to repay that debt. So my advice to the future people is, don't get into debt in the first place. It seems obvious, but that's the fact. Let's expand within our own resources. There's still lots of grant funding out there. Let's get the grant funding. Let's develop in conjunction with our finances, not relying on future finances to play for current growth. And that, unfortunately, that's happened with not just rugby clubs, but a few other clubs. And I think we have enough of a product for us to expand in a very sensible way and keep it in line with our resources, and that's quite important. It's a lesson for the future, I think. Like all the leaders that have spoken today, I was also had many roles in the club. I've been chairman, secretary, first team captain, fourth team captain even, and also fixture secretary and what have you. And I followed, Isaac Newton said, you're standing on the shoulders of giants. The people that you've interviewed today were the people that I looked up to as I came through the club as a kid and joined the team, played from being a teenager, playing for the first team at 17 or what have you. And it was that desire to preserve and improve Consett Rugby Club that drove myself and Barry to put in a decade or more of hard work. And I'm pleased to see when our children and grandchildren have come along that there was a club here to be proud of, and I think the centenary is an opportunity to reflect on what Consett Rugby Club has become and hopefully inspire the next generation to make it even better than it is now.
So my name is Nick Cook. I'm the current first team captain, non-playing unfortunately, because I've got a long-term injury at the minute as of last season, so I'm doing as much as I can behind the scenes. But I'm sort of born in Consett, Shotley Bridge Hospital, and I've sort of been here since ever I'd really walk, really, in all honesty. Probably 4-year-old or whenever the minis started, when my dad started that time. The best game I've probably played in, I would probably say, from a personal point of view, the first season that I was captain back in 2012-13 when we won the County Cup, the Intermediate County Cup for the first time in quite a long time, in many years. That's probably the most memorable one for me, but a lot of other ones stand out in sense of winning the league. We've won the league twice as well, it's also been very good to be involved in those games as well. In terms of what it means for me to play for the club, I mean, it's an honour, especially to be nominated as first team captain from sort of the committee and all of that sort of stuff. That's a big honour, and to have sort of my parents involved as well. My dad, my brother was involved at one point, and then now my young son Leo coming through, who'll hopefully also play a prominent role in the club and hopefully follow in both of our footsteps and being captain at some point of the first team. The fondest or funniest, I don't know if we're allowed to be PC or not, I don't know, but lots of things probably to be said off camera, but keeping it clean and PG, probably in this room on the stage at the back there is probably one of the court sessions that we call them that we have, or the socials that we have when people have got minimal clothes on and everyone's having a good drink and a good night and stuff, and so someone proceeded to send me flying off one of the tables, and I ended up maybe in hospital, so that one will probably live long in the memory, I would say, and in my parents' memory as well. I mean, it's hard to pick really in terms of my best overall memory. Obviously, I've sort of mentioned a couple of the playing memories that I have so far. I think just now being able to see where the club's at and how it's developing, and how the juniors and the minis and stuff are now developing, and seeing them come through, and sort of me personally being involved in sort of helping them through the junior section and into the seniors now, where they're starting to play senior rugby, and me being able to play alongside people who were sort of in that sort of mini section when I was just first starting playing for the seniors in the first team. That's probably one of the main things I would say. As I say, obviously the victories in the county cups and winning the league twice and stuff like that is definitely up there with the playing side of things, but I think just in general, just being involved with the club, the family feel around the place, and the way that we're now developing the minis and the junior sections, fantastic, and I think it bodes well for years to come.